Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, with Sheldon Richmond, the foundation's vice president. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show on the internet that brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day that you're certainly not going to get in the mainstream media. We're going to talk a little bit about immigration today. It's always in the news. There's perpetual crises. You know, I grew up on the Texas-Mexican border on a farm on the Rio Grande, and I've seen this immigration mess from practically since the day I was born, or at least old enough to think. I mean, it's just constant. What you have is a crisis and then reform, crisis and reform, crisis and reform, and always. The idea is, well, the reform's going to fix the system, Jacob. It's going to fix the system. And it never does. It always just makes the situation worse. It produces a new crisis down the line. I remember when I was in my 20s or 30s, and they were proposing making it illegal to hire illegal aliens. Because when I was growing up, we hired illegal aliens on my farm legally. And they're the hardest working people I've ever seen. And so they said, well, if we just make it illegal, they can't get jobs anywhere. And of course, I just laughed at this because I knew it was just another reform. Here we go again. And sure enough, I mean, you got the crisis with fake IDs. And what about that Berlin fence down there? I thought that was supposed to resolve all the crises. And now we're talking about, who should be made a citizen and who should be permitted to come in and work. Absolutely ridiculous. The only solution to this thing is what we've been arguing here at the Future of Freedom Foundation since our inception: open borders, free trade, and open immigration. What do you think, Sheldon?
Well, I, of course, agree with that position, and I agree with what you started off by saying, that this is a perpetual motion machine where they're always going to find some reason to increase the power of the state related to immigration. And if the fence doesn't do it, then they'll say we need a higher fence. And if that doesn't do it, then they'll say we need to fully militarize the border. And if that doesn't do it, they'll call for, saturation drone coverage of the border. So it never stops. It seems to me that people who claim that for liberty and yet want all kinds of border controls and other sort of controls on people who don't have official government permission to be in the country really can't claim to be freedom lovers. I mean, for example, most of these people claim they're for the free enterprise system, and yet they want to have harsh penalties for employers that hire the wrong people. I don't see how you can square those two things. You're either for freedom of exchange and free enterprise, which means hiring any willing worker, or you're not. So, these people ought to step up and tell us what they're in favor of. You can't be for free enterprise and for tough sanctions on employers. And then the logic of it, of course, draws us closer and closer to things like a national ID, which has been talked about favorably by Chuck Schumer and John McCain in the Senate, who are part of this gang of 8 that are writing a so-called comprehensive immigration reform bill. The last I can find, as of March or so, it sounds like they've dropped the idea of a national ID because of cost. Not because of any kind of principle. They just think it's too expensive. They want to expand this E-Verify database where if you go for a job, they run your name through that to see whether you're in there. That's not quite the same as a national ID. This national ID, by the way, would have some sort of biometric information like a fingerprint or other thing. It would be a chip embedded in it with personal information. Ron Paul, I see, is sounding a warning about this, but it looks like for the moment it's not in the bill or the draft that they're working on. But I think we should keep an eye on this. The logic, of course, pulls you towards something like a national ID. I mean, if you're really serious about denying any kind of work or job or anything to someone who you claim doesn't belong here, then what alternative do you really have to one of these national ID things that have biometric information that can't be counterfeited? And the logic just draws you to that position. So I think we need to be vigilant about that.
Yeah, your initial point about the militarized border is absolutely right on. And people that haven't traveled down to the border are really not familiar with the fact that there really is a police state down there. I mean, it's not militarized in the sense that the U.S. military is involved, but the military has been involved in the past. But when you go down to the border, It's a weird sensation because it really does feel like a police state. You've got Border Patrol agents and, of course, DEA agents and their much vaunted 40-year-old war on drugs everywhere. But they've got these roving Border Patrol checkpoints. They've got fixed checkpoints, Sheldon. Like in Laredo, when you go 40 miles north of Laredo and you go over the crest of the hill, all of a sudden you see this surreal sight, which is a fixed, permanent immigration checkpoint, where you go and they ask for your papers. And if you're a dark-skinned Mexican American in a bad quality car, they're not going to let you go through unless you have your passport or some type of identification. They're going to take you back to jail, or they're simply not going to let you pass. And this is America. I mean, this is north of the border. This is inside the United States. They're stopping people and asking for papers, just like in the Soviet Union. In Arizona, I just got back from there. There's one on the east-west interstate highway. I mean, the people are just traveling from one part of the United States to the other, have to stop at this Soviet-like checkpoint. On my farm that I grew up on, Border Patrol agents could come on without warrants because it was on the border, search to their little heart's content. That later got expanded to ranches along the border. I mean, it's absolutely a little mini police state. And your point about free enterprise is absolutely right. I mean, look, if it's my money and it's my business, why shouldn't I have the right to engage in any economic transaction I want with anyone in the world? I mean, isn't that what free enterprise means? Enterprise that's free of government control? I mean, this is what statists don't understand. They think that free enterprise is regulated or controlled enterprise. And so that's the beauty of the libertarian paradigm, is we want to restore the concepts of economic liberty, fundamental rights, freedom of association. Let people be free to engage in economic transactions with anyone in the world.
Well, border checks are bad enough, but it seems intolerable that there are checkpoints well within the territory of the United States, including east-west routes. And I can't believe that Americans are putting up with this. I sure hope there's a suit against it. I hope the ACLU or somebody is trying to stop that. I mean, I can't think of anything more ominous than checkpoints, within the country. And especially, like you point out, going east to west. I mean, it's ridiculous. Why not house-to-house searches if we're going to do that? Any place in the United States, because there could be, a so-called illegal alien. That's a terrible phrase, by the way. And I think I just call them people without papers. And then my follow-up is, who cares? Who cares if someone doesn't have government papers? I mean, why is that important that you have government permission to be anywhere? You're not supposed to need government permission to live your life peacefully. So. Yeah, this is getting out of hand. It's going to get worse. This so-called compromise, comprehensive plan that so many people want to come up with, is going to contain, of course, before it won't get passed without, really big beefing up of border security. Again, this militarization, because the Republicans won't go for it if there's not a whole big show about that. On the other hand, even the harder right doesn't like anything that they say will smack of amnesty. Here I have to, in a way, in a strange way, I have to agree with them. I'm totally against amnesty on two grounds. Number one, I don't think there should be amnesty for people without papers because they didn't do anything wrong. Amnesty implies forgiving somebody, which that implies they've done something wrong. I don't think someone who's come here without government permission has done anything wrong, so amnesty would be inappropriate. And I'm also against amnesty for any government official who has harassed a person without papers. There should be no amnesty for those people. Those people should be prosecuted to the fullest extent because they've harassed people, peaceful people, minding their own business. So you can put me down as opposed to amnesty, absolutely.
Well, the citizenship thing I find kind of interesting because in the libertarian paradigm, people would be free to come to the United States without government interference, tour, invest, go on vacation, open up businesses, get jobs, and they would simply retain their citizenship. I mean, it wouldn't be a big deal. Like right now, there's 1 million Americans living in Mexico, and they retain their American citizenship. They speak English. Like, who cares? And so, people certainly would be free to apply for citizenship, but it wouldn't be the big deal that it is today when you've got these laws against illegal entry. people would just come in and transact business and do their thing and retain their citizenship. What would be wrong with that? I mean, I think that shows you that a lot of these crises are just government concocted. They jump from one crisis to another because of their idiotic reforms.
That's right. I mean, I don't think people are sneaking into the U.S. So they can vote. I mean, that's not the magnet. The magnet is economic opportunity. And the fact that this is a wealthier society, and you take anybody from a poor society and put them in a wealthier society, they are going to be more productive just by definition, because they're surrounded by capital. There's greater per capita capital investment in the United States, and so those people will produce more here than they would in a much poorer environment. So we all gain by that. That's not just good for them. That's good for us, because they'll be producing goods and services, which will drive down the price of goods and services. And lots of immigrants start businesses. So we get innovation, we get new things. They also hire people. And so that's all to the good. We should welcome that. And I don't understand this fear. The Heritage Foundation is trying to stir up a lot of fear by, number one, claiming that any kind of change is going to cost, at least the kind of change being talked about by the Gang of Eight is going to cost over $6 trillion. Now, I don't know about the precise details of the bill that the Gang of Eight is going to come up with. I have a hard time believing anything they're coming up with is going to cost $6 trillion. But that study has been criticized because it didn't take into account the productivity of immigrants coming from a poor country like Mexico or further south to the United States, where they will produce and increase wealth. So it didn't count any of that. Also, of course, it's been revealed that one of the authors of the study is a guy who believes that Mexicans have low IQs, and their offspring and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will have low IQs as far as the eye can see. This guy, Jason Richwine, now has been had to resign. He was such an embarrassment. He had to resign from the Heritage Foundation over this. They tried to explain that he just crunched the numbers in the study, but a lot of people found that a pretty lame explanation. And let's keep in mind that every immigrant group from the beginning of the United States was always stigmatized as being low IQ, having low IQs, not being very intelligent. This was said about every group you can name, including Asians, Jews, everybody. So this is an old saw. You stigmatize a group of who wants to immigrate here by saying that they're not as intelligent as the rest of us. It's just nonsense.
Well, as we all know, conservatives have always been horrible when it comes to immigration, and it sort of exemplifies the earlier point that we were making, that conservatives are always talking about, we favor free enterprise and free markets and limited government, and then here they advocate a system in which the government puts people in jail for hiring people with their own money, or for people that are trying to sustain their lives through labor and better their lives and have strong family values. I mean, it just sort of demonstrates the hypocrisy of the conservative movement. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that immigration is a tremendous positive to an economy, because conservatives and statists in general, they always sort of leave this implication that immigrants are a burden. We keep them out in order to preserve our prosperity here. That's nonsense. When our American ancestors had open immigration at Ellis Island, I mean, for all practical purposes, there was no barrier at all. A simple tuberculosis check or something. And in the Southwest, after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, Mexicans could cross back and forth. It had previously been their country. There was no restrictions, and there was tremendous economic prosperity during these periods of time. And Argentina, by the way, demonstrated the same thing, that before Perón came in, they embraced a lot of the founding principles of America, including, open borders, open immigration, low taxes, low regulations, and they had this tremendous prosperous period in Argentine history. So this idea that immigrants are a burden is actually the exact opposite. Because of the division of labor, they take jobs at the bottom, they free up people that previously were in those jobs to take better paying jobs like immigrants go buy cars. There are used cars. And so now all of a sudden the demand is existing in the used car industry where people need salesmen and so forth. So, yeah, free immigration is one of the keys to economic prosperity.
Yeah, I've been reading Bastiat's great treatise, his magnum opus, Economic Harmonies, and he's got a section on there in praise of population density. He was answering Malthus, of course, who was fearful that we will always live at subsistence level because every time we made a little extra wealth, we'd have more kids, and that would then bring down the standard of living. Bastiat said that's just nonsense, and he pointed out how the more dense a population, given the right institutions now, meaning the institutions of freedom, free trade, private protection of property, protection of life, and free commerce. A denser population is better than a more sparse population because you have economies of scale, you have a finer division of labor, all the benefits. He spends pages talking about all the benefits of a more densely populated area than a one that's got very few people. So they understood it back then. I don't, conservatives would claim if they know Bastiat, they probably say, "Oh yeah, I like Bastiat," but they never read this part of the great free market tradition, what I want to call the radical liberal tradition, because liberal, of course, originally meant being for freedom and free trade and free enterprise. They don't get that. I don't know what they fear. I think there is some racism involved. I think we see it in this guy who worked at Heritage. It's not a very attractive thing. Some Republicans seem to realize they have to look like they're better on this issue than they really are, and that's why you're seeing Rubio and McCain try to get on board with this bill. But we have to watch out because this is not going to be a good bill. It's going to punish the people that are here when I don't think they violated any true law. Again, the radical liberal tradition, our tradition, says that a law passed by a legislature that conflicts with natural law is not a law, and there is no obligation to obey it. So people that come here peacefully have not violated the natural law and shouldn't be punished, but you're going to see punishment in this bill.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because that's one of the first things that I started to realize right at the time I was discovering libertarianism, that I was an advocate of the welfare state. I believed government should help the poor, and I was the ACLU rep in my hometown of Laredo, and then all of a sudden I started realizing that how can you have this support for the welfare state, which, the modern day liberal or progressive or statist says that he justifies us by, and treat these people who are the poorest people you'd ever find in society in this way. Because we talk about conservatives, but let's face it, liberals or progressives in the modern day corrupted form of the word liberal, they've been doing this for decades themselves. They've been putting people in jail for committing what they consider is the crime of trying to sustain your life through labor. And I don't think we should ever let them off the hook for this hypocrisy. I mean, that's what caused me to start questioning the whole welfare state justification of, if you oppose welfare, you hate the poor and the needy and all this stuff. Well, yeah, show me how much you love the poor by how you've been treating these people. And the second point I want to make here, Sheldon, is we've got the United States of America as a model example of free trade and open immigration. People are free to cross borders all across the continental United States. Well, except for those fixed checkpoints down there. But there's no trade restrictions. There's no immigration controls, travel restrictions. Nobody worries about a trade deficit between New York and Florida. It just doesn't even come up. And people pass back and forth with nobody monitoring the numbers. And that's what we're seeking on an international basis, where people are just coming in, traveling without being harassed and harangued by government officials.
Yeah, there's an additional point there. Different states, have different levels of welfare benefits. Some are more generous than others, and yet you don't see a flood of population from the low welfare state benefit states to the high benefit states. That undermines one of the criticisms that sometimes comes from conservatives, that the people from south of the border, there's not a lot of concern about people from north of the border, interestingly, but people from south of the border are going to come here for welfare benefits. Now, the studies debunk this. I mean, going back to Julian Simon in the 80s, that's not what attracts people here. And so, that's not why people are coming. They come here for the opportunity. And the funny thing is, ironically, the way to discourage immigrants from coming here is to stay in a deep recession. They say that slowed down some of the flow of people from across the Mexican border because there didn't seem to be job prospects. Well, the conservatives could get their way, I guess, by miring us in a permanent recession, and that would discourage people from coming here because they're coming for work. They're coming for work and the higher pay they can get than they can get at home. And we should have our arms open because they're producers. Somebody used to say they come with one mouth, but they come with two hands. A way of summing up that we only look at the consumer side of these people. They're also producers. But another thing that irritates me, I like pointing out how we all benefit from immigrants coming here, but I really don't like to have that to be the primary emphasis. The emphasis is their freedom, not that we benefit from them. That sounds a little bit like, let them come here, we can use them and get benefits. It's their freedom and their ability to make better lives that I think should be the primary emphasis. And so, I don't like to seem like I'm forgetting the first in order to stress the economic benefits to us, even though they're undeniable.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's our freedom, too. It's the freedom to do what we want with our own money and hire whomever we want. It's the freedom of association. It's their freedom, it's our freedom. That's what Jefferson was talking about in the Declaration of Independence, that these rights adhere to everyone, not just Americans, not just foreigners, but everyone. And I'm glad you brought up this welfare canard. How often do we hear this thing? It's just such nonsense. Milton Friedman says, well, as long as we have a welfare state, we can't have open borders. Friedman may have been a Nobel Prize winner, but he was absolutely wrong on this one. That you can have a welfare state and not infringe on people's fundamental rights, including the right of travel and freedom of association and economic liberty and liberty of contract. Whenever I hear this stuff that, immigrants are coming on welfare, I challenge those people to show me one instance of where there has been an immigration raid on a welfare office. And they can't do it. I don't think there has ever in the history of this war on immigrants been an immigration raid on a welfare office. You would think if that's what they're coming for, that's where they would all be. But that's not where the raids are. The raids are always in private businesses because that's where they're working. That they come here to get a job, to be left alone, try to make a little money, send the money back to their families. They have strong family values. And the fact that our government is putting people in jail for this is an absolute moral abomination. And these excuses and justifications like, they're going on welfare, it's just a fake and false canard.
Yeah, the other thing that irritates me are the ones who say, well, we're not against immigration, we're even for higher levels of immigration. But we have to select the people that come here because we want the right people, the people that fill the jobs that need filling, where we have a shortage. Now, I have no more confidence in the government being able to engineer the domestic population than I have in their ability to engineer the incoming immigrant population. This idea that government ought to socially engineer so we have just the right population is offensive. First of all, government doesn't know what the needs are going to be, the economic needs are going to be in the future. It's always been a very bad predictor of those things. So even if you think that's a good idea, the government's not going to be able to do it. But on the other hand, this is a matter of human freedom, human dignity, individual rights. And for the government to say, well, we'll let you in if you have the proper skills that we need. In other words, it's, our need comes first. Your dignity and your freedom will only recognize that if it serves our needs is a very it's a terrible attitude. It's not in the liberal spirit, which we like to identify with the United States, the original liberal spirit of openness and recognizing the dignity of people. The people are ends in themselves, not merely means to our ends. And yet, they give it all away when you hear someone like Charles Krauthammer say, hey, people want to come here. In other words, he compared it to like a football draft. Hey, we have the first draft choice. People want to come here. So why aren't we picking the high quality people that we want rather than just let anybody in? That's the attitude. I condemn that attitude in the strongest possible way.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it really is Sheldon, to me, the prime example of socialist central planning. I mean, here you have this central board in the federal government deciding what number of immigrants from each country, what their caliber should be, what their background should be. And so, you know, why would we expect anything but shortages and crises and illegal immigrants or immigrants coming here illegally? I mean, this is what central planning does. It creates shortages. It creates distortions that would not be there in terms of a market process. And so I don't see how people can be surprised that immigration is such a mess. I mean, to me, this is just a variation of the socialist model. And why not just use free markets? You know, you let anyone come in. You know, you're absolutely right when they say, oh, we want only the rich or the well-educated and the well-qualified. You know, that's totally contrary to the spirit on that poem on the Statue of Liberty, where, you know, she talks in terms of the homeless, the tempest-tossed, you know, the very bottom of society, the very poorest people. They're not going to pick those in this central planning board. Those are the people who get locked out, and yet those are the people that, you know, why shouldn't they be as free as anyone else to better their lives, sustain their lives, if all they're doing is entering into a mutually beneficial transaction with an American employer who wants to hire them? I mean, that's the real point here. You've got, when they raid these businesses, American employers are simply saying, we like these workers. They're hard workers. Why not rely on the market, Sheldon?
Well, that's right, and also let's also point out that when employers today do hire people who don't have government permission to be here, and I always put in parenthetically, so what? That gives the employer an opportunity to exploit those employees that they would never have under free immigration, under free movement, because those people are, you know, come here poor in many cases. They're desperate, and they can, an employer or really a lot of other people can can threaten them by saying, look, I'll turn you in to ICE if you don't do what I say. That's purely the result of the law. In other words, an employer or someone else would not have that kind of power over those individuals if they couldn't call the immigration service and say, I got somebody here who doesn't belong here. So look how this law opens the door to the worst kind of exploitation, and I think that includes bad working conditions that wouldn't exist in a free environment. So the people that want these kinds of laws and sanctions are actually making it much tougher on the most vulnerable people. I mean, they should not be able to present themselves as humanitarians because they are making life hell for people who are just looking to make a better life for themselves.
That's a tremendous point. And I saw it growing up in Laredo, where, you know, most middle-class families had a nanny or a maid as part of their household, and some of the housewives were very ruthless women. I mean, they would abuse the illegal immigrant maid, or in many cases, and threaten them that if you don't like it, I'll call the Border Patrol. And some of them did, and the Border Patrol would come and pick them up, or they wouldn't pay them what they had agreed to pay them, and there was nothing the immigrant could do because the employer could simply call the Border Patrol and come and pick them up. And your point about how these laws create distortions is also great, because, you know, like, you take these transporters of illegal aliens, where they transport immigrants north for a certain fee. Well, all that's a direct result of the immigration controls. When you see immigrants dying in the back of a tractor trailer, which is what happened in Texas a few years ago, that's a direct result of immigration controls. And the feds get all hyped up about it and say, we're going to prosecute the driver, we're going to prosecute the guy that was smuggling these people in. But it's really the federal officials themselves, in the ultimate analysis, are responsible because they've given rise to this. I mean, an analogy is like the drug war. You make drugs illegal, and you bring up this host of problems with drug violence and so forth. Well, it's the government itself that enacts these laws that is morally responsible for these deaths. In an unhampered market economy, immigrants would just travel north or east or west like normal human beings on the bus or on airplanes or cars or whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely. And once they get here, they would have mobility. If they were unhappy with a job, they could quit it and try to find another job. Now, there may be reluctance to do that. If they have a job, they may think, well, if I change jobs, maybe it's going to come to light that I don't have, the papers, and so I'll stay put, which means I'll put up with conditions which I don't like, but, the alternative is to maybe get caught and sent back. And so again, it's more exploitation, and this is my point about no amnesty for government officials. They are committing offenses against people without papers, and I think they should be held accountable for that.
That's great, Sheldon. Well, that wraps up our show. We've run out of time. Thanks again for participating in the show, and greatly enjoyed it again. And if you're not subscribing to our FFF Daily, we invite you to do so. It's free of charge. We strive to make it the best internet page on the web, with op-eds and articles and editorials, all from a strong, pure libertarian perspective. And also subscribe to our journal, Future of Freedom, and we'd love to have your donations. The only way that we can do the work we do is with those of you that support our work. So that's this week's show on the Libertarian Angle, and we look forward to sharing with you more libertarian perspectives next week.